conversations with friends and family. And we don't have to look very far to see, I guess, the real world consequences of misinformation, particularly misinformation online. So we had the storming of the US Capitol in January. That showed us what can happen when people are misinformed through social media. And I guess in the context of COVID-19, the consequences are consequences for our health, both at an individual level, putting ourselves potentially at increased risk if we read misinformation and perhaps become a little bit concerned or hesitant about the vaccine, and also at a public health level, because the success of vaccines relies on widespread uptake. And so we've all kind of got a stake in the game when it comes to misinfo.
You would think there's ample evidence to show the effects of COVID-19 right around the world. So why do you think we are seeing misinformation spread so rapidly?
I think it's a complicated question. Vaccine misinformation, in a way, isn't really anything new. We've had a long kind of tradition of a small but very vocal minority of people in the community kind of espousing anti-vaccination views and in that spreading pseudoscientific information. And obviously within the pandemic, that's really been helped spread by social media and the ubiquity of social media. And I think, places like Facebook and Twitter and other platforms have tried to counter a bit of that. There's now some warnings on misinformation which guides us to more credible sources. But I think, they've still received quite a bit of criticism that regulation is not strong enough. So I think that's one of the problems, is how that kind of ecosystem works. I think probably the other thing in the context of COVID-19 is the environment in which the misinformation is spreading is important. And by that I mean the last year and a half has been marked by a lot of upheaval and uncertainty, and we're watching the science kind of unfold in real time. And so with that comes a lot of unknowns, and our understanding about the virus and the vaccines, that changes. Sometimes it feels like day to day. And so people are probably in a position where we're a little bit more vulnerable to seeing information that's not credible or trustworthy, because we're kind of overwhelmed with information all the time. And I think, where mainstream science tends to be cautious and we kind of proceed with a little bit of trepidation, as we should, because there's a lot we still don't know, people who spread misinformation, and misinformation generally tends to offer us a narrative that has assurances and certainty and is often quite emotional in its nature. And so people can tend to want to kind of lean into that information because it offers a simple answer when in fact it's more complicated.
As a science reporter, is misinformation the same as vaccine hesitancy? I mean, if someone is feeling a bit reticent about these vaccines coming out, does it mean that they're reading the wrong information, or is their suspicion perhaps valid in some ways because the science, as you say, isn't perfect?
Yeah, that's exactly right, and that's a really important distinction to make when we're talking about vaccine hesitancy. Generally speaking, Australians are broadly in support of immunisation. We have very strong rates of childhood immunisation. And when it comes to the COVID vaccines, we're seeing that proportion of people who are hesitant is a little bit bigger than what we normally see. But that doesn't necessarily mean they're all people who are actively against vaccination or ideologically opposed or anything like we normally think about when we think of anti-vaxxers, so to speak. Generally, it's normal that there's some hesitancy and that there's some questions. We'd see that with any kind of new vaccine. Because it's new, we're still learning things about it. So it makes sense that people have some questions. And I think, we need to be careful not to kind of jump down people's throats or be too quick to jump to conclusions when people maybe express a bit of hesitancy or concern. It's about trying to understand where they're coming from and maybe interrogate what they've read or what's making them feel worried. Do you have some advice on helping people assess when it might be useful to engage and when it's time to perhaps step back and let go for a moment? Yeah, look, conversations about vaccines can be really emotive, and vaccine researchers and communication experts, they really recommend, rather than we all kind of have this temptation where we want to immediately correct information or, play a bit of this game of scientific ping pong of trying to throw facts at someone. And actually, that usually doesn't work, and in some cases can actually entrench those views and concerns a bit further. So the best way to do it is firstly assess whether it's worth engaging. Is this someone who's open to other viewpoints? And if they are, then potentially proceed with that. And then, try and get on their level a bit. What is it that's making them feel concerned? Try and make them feel heard and respected, even if you don't agree with them, just acknowledging where they're at. And maybe there's an opportunity, if they tell you what's worrying them, that you can kind of say, okay, misinformation or the Department of Health says this or my doctor says this, that you can try and point them in the direction of some trustworthy info. And the other thing is we can also act as role models. If you intend to get vaccinated and you want to get vaccinated, it's important to share that with your friends and family, that you want to do that, why you want to do that, that you think it's a good thing to do in the community. All those things can help rather than kind of attacking people and patronising people, which doesn't get us very far.
And that is the show for this week. Join us every Friday at this time on the News Channel as well as on demand on iView and the ABC News Channel on YouTube. From us,